God of War Sons of Sparta burst onto the scene during the State of Play announcement of the OG God of War trilogy remake. And honestly, the hype was real. Not only did we get confirmation that Kratos would be returning to the Greek setting, but we also found out that the original Kratos voice actor T.C. Carson would be back for both the remake and the new 2D Metroidvania-style spinoff. For longtime fans like me, it was enough for me to get locked in. And while nostalgia does do a lot of the heavy lifting here, Sons of Sparta unfortunately stumbles out of the gate. Between technical issues, a mostly bland story, uninspired loot and abilities, and some genuinely annoying game mechanics, the game struggles to find its footing. The 2D side-scrolling Metroidvania format also didn't do much to win me over. That said, there are some bright spots. The accessibility options are surprisingly solid. You are able to tank a lot of attacks and avoid being deleted. And the combat is another highlight. It blends the aggressive, fast-paced style of the original God of War trilogy with the armor upgrades and progression systems of the newer games. That mix of the old and new works really well, and even better than I expected inside of this genre. But as someone who rarely ventures into the 2D side-scrolling Metroidvania genre, there's nothing here that truly converted me. After about 40 hours, I didn't feel any real need to go back in and clean up the map of different activities that I have not completed. I had a good time in this spin-off, but my journey in the Elegh has come to an end. So with that said, here is AntiMetaDoom's review on God of War Sons of Sparta. Kratos and Deimos' relationship is front and center throughout the game's runtime. Deimos, the younger, more charismatic brother, is eager to blaze his own path and do things his own way, and that energy brings a completely different tone that contrasts perfectly with Kratos' more serious and disciplined, nonsensical mind state. What really stood out to me though was Deimos' moral compass. He's the one who pushes to continue the hunt for Vasilis even when Kratos initially wants to walk away. He has a strong moral code and a deep sense of responsibility and a real commitment to his Spartan duties. In a lot of ways, Deimos becomes the driving force behind that mission, constantly making sure that the search continues and holding Kratos accountable. And I love that dynamic because it flips the expectations. You'd think Kratos would be the one pushing forward, but it's actually Deimos stepping up and reminding Kratos what it means to lead. Throughout the story, it feels like Kratos is the one giving orders and teaching lessons, but by the time the credit rolls, they're standing on equal footing. And it's Kratos who ends up walking away having learned some valuable lessons as well. My favorite supporting character was by far Kryptia, and I hope I'm saying that right. But every time you ran into him at the campsite, he was intense as hell, and he delivers solid advice to the young Spartan soldiers. And honestly, I found myself looking forward to seeing him and what crazy stuff he'd say at the campsites. One of the more interesting things that does develop throughout the campaign is Kratos' relationship with his rank in the Spartan army. Early on, he almost feels ashamed of it, uncomfortable with the responsibility and the expectations that comes with leadership. But as the story progresses, that feeling slowly evolves into a stronger sense of duty. Unfortunately, while the story does start out strong, it begins to fizzle out after about the 5 or 6 hour mark. You kind of get a sense of what's going on and what probably happened to Vasilis, so you kind of start tuning out and you start tuning more in with the combat. But overall, I did enjoy the characters, I did enjoy the side quests, and I did enjoy the story that Sons of Sparta provided. The combat is fast and actually gives you that feeling of being powerful. Your standard parry system is in place, along with projectile weapons, and your Spartan spear rounds out the options. On paper, it seems like there's plenty here to make stylish combos, and to an extent you can. The spear comes with 3 slots to customize, with both active and passive abilities, and the same goes for your belt and shield. This setup allows for fast, furious combos, but in practice, it never quite reaches that stylish flowing combat I was looking for. The combo system feels a bit forced. You can cycle through projectile weapons and special abilities, but there's no real cohesion. It's more button mashing than perfectly timed attacks. The moves are limited to about 5 special abilities in total on the tail of the spear, and the tip and the grip being more passive abilities. All are upgradable with the same crafting materials, which is convenient, but it also makes them feel bland after about a few hours of playtime. You never really get that wow factor of chaining together combos and making each fight feel unique. Loot follows in the same trend. While you are constantly collecting materials to upgrade weapons, armors, and abilities, you almost never get meaningful loot like new weapons or exciting abilities. Everything is functional that you find, but it doesn't add much variety or excitement to the combat. And after a while, you really won't care that you came across a new chest because you'll already know what to expect from it once you open it up. One of my favorite parts, though, is the accessibility options. You can enable things like audio and video cues for incoming attacks. You can enable auto aim, as well as show stagger points for enemies. These touches make the game much more approachable for a broader audience, so they can now focus on things like combat and the story instead of constantly getting punished. Now, let's get into my biggest pet peeve of not only this game, but the OG God of War trilogy as well. You cannot cancel out of special abilities or special attacks, and this drives me absolutely crazy. Essentially, you're locked into an animation the moment you trigger that move. Now, what this does is makes certain attacks extremely situational, and it also leads to them being impossible to be effective, because in the process of doing that ability, you're going to get attacked, you're going to get hit, and then it's going to cancel out. And then that's also going to leave you vulnerable for follow-up attacks on enemies. For example, the charge square attack, one of the most powerful moves in the game, becomes almost unusable because you're constantly getting interrupted as you are trying to load up the attack. Now, moves with long animations, they are always risky in this game or games like the OG God of War series because of this specific reason. Now, because of this, I mostly relied on parrying and dodging and using my special attacks consistently when I was able to. So, shout out to the Vanguard attack and shout out to the Walls of Sparta attack for actually being worth a damn and being worth using in the game. So overall, combat was okay. Wasn't really blown away by it. I'll be honest, I had a really hard time understanding the map for about the first 3 hours of playing. I was basically just running around aimlessly, unlocking areas without really knowing where I was supposed to go. Now, part of that is definitely a skill issue. But what isn't a skill issue is the artificial difficulty Sons of Sparta builds into some of its biome. To be fair, you do get equipment that reduces incoming status effects, but even then, a lot of these sections still feel cheap. The cold biome, for example, slows your movement to a crawl. Then there's the poison biome, where knee-deep water slows your movement, prevents you from jumping, all while your health is depleted from poison attacks from enemies. For me, this type of design always feels lazy. I just feel like today's development teams are creative enough to pass on these flawed mechanics. That said, I do want to give credit where it's due. The biomes themselves are distinct, well designed, and visually impressive. Each area has its own personality, and the environments are genuinely beautiful. The backdrops are especially strong. There's surprisingly a lot going on, which makes the level feel far larger and more alive than they actually are. Exploration follows a tried and true backtrack formula. You'll move through areas, hit progression walls, and later return once you've unlocked the right tools. I do appreciate how the game gives you reasons to revisit these spaces. Progressing through the main campaign and the end game naturally open up new combat encounters. That at least helps the backtracking feel more purposeful instead of completely forced. Puzzle design, however, is a mixed bag. Sometimes you can glance at a puzzle and instantly understand what you're supposed to do. Other times you're left completely confused, not because the puzzle itself is complicated, but because the game never clearly explains the tools or upgrades that are needed to progress. Most of the time, progression is tied to an upgrade, but that's never made explicit. This led to a lot of frustration, especially when I had every navigation tool unlocked and still couldn't figure out why I wasn't able to progress in a specific area. So for example, when you run into those barred rotating green lantern puzzles or whatever the hell they are, it would have been nice to get a slingshot prompt or a prompt to let me know like, hey, upgrade your slingshot to advance, or some type of upgrade that is highlighted inside of the menu. Just something to clearly communicate that, hey, you're not stuck, you just don't have the right tools to progress right now. I think that would have been really helpful. Checkpoint placement improves as the game opens up and more campsites become available. You're encouraged to explore and unlock these campsites early because fast travel becomes available between them later on in the campaign. Now, before that, fast travel was mostly limited to the temples, which can make early traversal feel slow and frustrating. Now, with that said, I do understand why the developers did it this way. They want you to experience the world on foot first, and from a design point, that does make sense. You know, walk around, get a lay of the land, get some combat in, find the campsites, and then we'll allow you to auto save or fast travel between them later on. So I really did like that. My biggest issue with the map overall is the lack of waypoint systems and unclear pathways. Objectives are often placed on the complete opposite side of the map, sometimes in areas you haven't even discovered yet. And without clear direction, finding the correct path can become frustrating. I would have loved some type of waypoint or guidance system, even just a general direction, instead of being left to wander, with only a vague outline of a partially completed map you're trying to navigate. So at the end of the day, God of War Sons of Sparta is a mixed bag. There's a lot here that I genuinely enjoyed, but there's also just as much holding it back from being something truly special. On the positive side, the combat feels fast, fluid, and powerful, and I really like the blend of old school God of War mechanics with the newer armor and upgrade system. The accessibility options are excellent, and visually the game looks great. And above all else, the relationship between Kratos and Deimos carries the entire experience. Their dynamic is easily the strongest part of the game, adding emotion, humor, and heart to an otherwise average story. But the negatives are hard to ignore. The main campaign starts strong but quickly loses steam, turning into a repetitive hunt that never quite reaches its full potential. Combat, while fun, lacks depth due to the limited abilities and bland loot. Some level designs lean heavily on artificial difficulty and frustrating status effects. Add in the confusing map layout, lack of waypoints, and unclear puzzle progression, and you've got a game that regularly gets in its own way. For me, Sons of Sparta feels like a solid idea that never fully comes together. It's not bad, and at times I actually had fun, but it's also inconsistent, frustrating, and ultimately forgettable outside of the Kratos character development. With that said, I'm giving God of War Sons of Sparta a 5 out of 10. It's worth playing if you're a hardcore God of War fan, but if you're not already invested in Kratos and his story, there's not much here going to change your mind.